title of my paper is The Shared Cultural Legacy Understanding the Bhagavad Gita Tradition in the Southeast Asia. So, when we talk about Bhagavad Gita or the Mahabharata, we generally talk about a spiritual tradition, a philosophical tradition, but rarely ever we have talked about Bhagavad Gita as a political tool to legitimize regimes not just in Indian subcontinent but also in the Southeast Asia. Here in this paper, I have tried to attempt to understand how Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata can become a bridge for not just Southeast Asia, not just Indian subcontinent, but also regions like Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, and even the Funan Kingdom. And it has worked as not just a religious text, but also a political text, as a liturgical narrative as well. So, we can talk about Bhagavad Gita tradition in multiple ways. One, first of all, for the past whole century, the 20th century, when the nationalist historiography started emerging in the Indian subcontinent, there was a perpetual attempt by the scholars to point out that Indian subcontinent, the political control of it, was not just limited to the Indian subcontinent, but it was a greater India. Like R.C. Majumdar in 1926 talked about the idea of a greater India, which encompassed India as well as the Southeast Asian region. So it started off a debate which is called the Indianization debate. To what extent the history of Southeast Asia is hegemonized by the influence of India and China, right? So initially scholars were talking about there are similar cultural roots that can be found between India and Southeast Asian region, where we find evidences of Vishnu, Shiva and Buddha. The cult of them are found all over the regions of Java, all over the regions of Hunan and the Indochina. Now, they were talking about the importance of texts like Mahabharata, texts like Ramayana, texts like Bhagavad Gita, and how it actually created a cultural bridge between the two regions. Now, in this whole debate, how do we perceive the onslaught of Bhagavad Gita? So, Bhagavad Gita in this context can be perceived in terms of its iconography, that's the visual history, in terms of its inscription, epigraphical history, as well as its textual history. So, it helped a lot that even before the coming of the Bhagavad Gita in the Southeast Asian tradition, we find the cult of Vishnu becoming very pertinent in the Southeast Asian region, and we find a lot of new temples that were dedicated to Vishnu. Most probably Angkor Wat, Angkor Dham, these were the regions which were temples which were dedicated to Vishnu. And not just Vishnu, we find iconography of Vishnu and Krishna very pertinent in the regions of Java. From 514 CE, we start finding iconography and inscription that are dealing with the cult of Vishnu and Krishna. Also, initial cult were not really talking about Krishna as such, as much they were talking about the Vamana, as much they were talking about the other avatars of Vishnu, Brahma and Krishna. So, when the Mahabharata came to the Southeast Asian region, we find there are major digressions from the Sanskrit Mahabharata that we find in the Indian subcontinent and the Javanese version of the Mahabharata. There are many digressions, and that digressions are also reflected in the way they have dealt with the Bhishma Parva. Bhishma Parva is the Parva where we find the portion of Bhagavad Gita. So Bhishma Parva, it has a very strong hermeneutic tradition in the Southeast Asia, wherein they have divided the whole Bhishma Parva into three parts. One is called Bhashya, second is called Sutra, third is called Vritika. The Bhashya are the long commentaries that were written on Bhagavad Gita. Second were the Sutra, which were very small one-point illustration of the same thing, and Vritikas were explanations. So hermeneutics, explanations and codification of the same language, it actually altered the way Bhagavad Gita was perceived in the Sanskrit tradition with how Bhagavad Gita was perceived in the Javanese tradition. So what scholars like T.M. Hunter talks about is that there was a selective appropriation of these texts by the people of Southeast Asia, or the kings of Southeast Asia, what we also call the Sanskrit cosmopolis, that it was not that they were extracting everything from Bhagavad Gita, or they were extracting everything from the Mahabharata, but they were only choosing those portions of the Bhagavad Gita or the Mahabharata which they can use to legitimize their own rule, which they can use to promote their own goodwill, which they can use to create a Sanskrit cosmopolis within their realm. So Sanskrit was not being used only for cultural aspect, but for a sense of political legitimization. So in this context, they particularly chose So in this context, they choose Bhagavad Gita not as a religious text but as a political text. So Bhagavad Gita was seen as a text which talked about kingship, the presence of a king, the presence of a larger figure, the idea of a Meru. The idea of a Meru is very important in the both Indian and Southeast Asian political configuration, and we find this is something that we figure in the context of Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata as well. So the idea of kingship is very much related to the idea of Meru. Meru means a mountain. Right. So the mountain is a symbolic in this context. So what these texts call in this context is pratik. So they talk about a pratik. The pratik is Meru. So Meru, like a mountain, is basically a middle path between earth and the sky. So similarly, a king is the mediator between the people in the human subjects and the gods. So the king is semi-deified. So in this, the similar vein, we find that in Bhagavad Gita, wherein in the initial chapter, Krishna is acting as a guide, as a guru, but by the 11th chapter, when we see the Virat Swarup, he becomes a god. Right. So the transformation of the guru into a god is something which is very much relevant. How a human figure, when he becomes a king, there is a deification of the same person. So this is something very much pertinent in the political landscape of Southeast Asia, wherein the veneration of king is very important, particularly because in the region like Burma, regions like Java, Indonesia, there is a custom wherein a king consider himself to be deified, and after his death he is venerated as one of the ancestors. So there is a worship of eponymous ancestor along with Buddhism, Shaivism and Vaishnavism, which is reflected in their appropriation of Vaishnavism and Shaivism. So when the Linga cult or when the Vaishnava cult was used in the Southeast Asia, they didn't just worship it as Shiva or Vishnu, they were worshipping as a representative of their ancestors. So for them, it was not just Shiva or not just Vishnu, it was their ancestors. So there was a political development in this context of the text of Bhagavad Gita. Another thing was that Bhagavad Gita also has a very strong liturgical value. That is to say, for a very long time, people, not everyone knows Sanskrit. Not everyone in Southeast Asia knows how to speak Sanskrit. So a lot of time what happens is that a text becomes an object of veneration. It becomes an object of worship wherein you are not reading the book. You are just keeping it at your home and you are basically venerating it every day as a symbol of gratitude, as a symbol of worship. So it acquired a kind of liturgical value wherein Bhagavad Gita becomes one of the major tenets, one of the major texts which represent the culture of South Asia. Now, and this culture is not something which only existed in the ancient time. In the modern time, this culture has arrived reinstated in a very different sense. Like in the 1960s, with the coming of the ISKCON movement, Prabhupada ISKCON movement, what has happened that ISKCON movement is initiated in the USA, in the American region. There we find a lot of diasporic audience from the South Asia as well as Southeast Asia. Now, when there was a survey recently conducted in 2011, and 67% of the people, not just from South Asia, but also from Southeast Asia, have talked about their familiarity with the text of Bhagavad Gita. Why is it so? It was because it actually in the 20th century, second half 20th century, the diasporic audience became what you call the Pan-Asian community. In the Pan-Asian community, they required a cultural semblance that binds Southeast Asia and South Asia together. And these kind of cultural texts like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita became that binding force through which they were able to extract, they were able to bind their culture together. So all in all, what we can point out that Bhagavad Gita exists not a bridge between South and Southeast Asia, not just because it is a spiritual text or it has a universal philosophical value, but also because it has a malleability to be converted into a political text, and it has the value to transform across the regions and create a semblance of familiarity in culture. Thank you very much.